I'm Scott Al Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. A little bit different topic today. Geospatial Tears asked me, is Nicaragua the place to wait and watch the world burn from safety? Well, that's a great question. And for those of us who are living down here, it's sometimes a more interesting question than you might think. So we're going to delve into that a little bit on today's show, right after the bump. I have a crazy busy weekend. A couple of big work emergencies have come up, and so I'm working around the clock this entire weekend. So I'm doing some videos from my desk, which I prefer not to do, but it's a little bit of a change of pace, I suppose, but it's going to get boring real quick. But Geospatial Tears posted this topic of the year stuff. Thanks. This is in reference to your plan B is a con, truth about global meltdown. He says, thanks, Scott. Nicaragua is self-sufficient, is substantial. Just in case, is this correct? I'm on to plan R or S or T by now, and sorry about the dogs barking, I can't make them stop. It would be nice to know if Nicaragua is a nice and easy place to watch as the world falls apart around us. And your thoughts on that? Well, this is a great question because so many people, and I kind of have this general attitude that the world is not as bad as people make it out to be. We've kind of gotten into a spiral of despair as a global culture. You know, don't get me wrong, certainly there are tons of terrible things happening and some things we're really worried about, and there's the possibility of some really terrible things, and then who knows what's going to happen in the future. But my overall feelings that people tend to be very doom and gloom, and as we go through a period of transition with media, right, social media and the internet are things that we are kind of evolving, at least at a cultural level, to deal with. I think that we've have an access to disparity in a way that we've not had before, and the world is more conquered than it has been before, and we're starting to go to space and realizing how distant things are, and there's a lot going on that can lead to these are not things that we as a species have adapted to deal with yet. And just knowing that, I think, makes you feel better, right? Like, the world's not necessarily so bad. It's changing in a way that your brain isn't ready for. You need to step back and be less emotional and more logical about it, and then it'll probably be okay. Whoa, well, that helps. I didn't think of it that way, right? Well, who does? Why would you, right? So I believe that to be true in a lot of cases, that it's really not as bad as people think, or to put it in a different perspective, maybe it wasn't so good all along, and things are actually on a different trajectory than we think. Because I think a lot of people think it was great, and now it's just tanking, right? And I think that if you really look historically, it was actually pretty awful. And either we're kind of steady state, and that's depressing to some degree, but not nearly as depressing as everything collapsing, but more likely things are improving. Maybe not as fast as we'd like, but not getting worse, it seems. Well, sure, maybe over the last 2 years, things have gotten worse globally, but still, is that really true, or is that just perspective? Probably it's real, but it's still a very isolated dip in the general quality of things. Overall, we're probably still advancing as a species. Maybe none of that's true, but that's my take on it. And one of the reasons, though, that I think that that's a good take is when I look at things from, say, an American perspective, and this is not to pick on the US, it's what I have access to, right? So just take it with the right context. When I look at things from an American perspective, there tends to be a lot of panic. There's a giant economy that we're worried is going to fail. There's laws that are not being respected. There's a general unhappiness with each other, with life, with the future. We're seeing a collapse in demographics, right? People are not having children at the same rate. People are worried about what the future brings. They just don't have a good outlook on things, and for reasonable reasons. So, and when you look at American media, newspapers, social media, doesn't matter. You get some amount of fluff, right? People dancing to it's my first time in Puerto Rico, or you get really depressing news about how everything is falling apart and it's all going to end soon. And that's about the two extremes, right? There is mindless drivel and panic. And of course, the more panic there is, the more people turn to mindless drivel. You don't want sensible media when you're depressed. You want something to take your mind off of it quickly. So everything kind of feeds each other. It's a spiral. But just because someone's spiraling doesn't mean that the world around them is actually bad. It just means that they themselves are spiraling. Now, that's at an individual human level. If you take cultures, they potentially do the same thing. So we may have Western civilization kind of heading in a counterclockwise trip around the drain, emotionally speaking, right? But is that really an indicator that Western civilization is about to collapse? No, probably not. Probably it's been through this feeling many times in the past, but not exacerbated by the whole everyone being able to talk to each other. So all of that may sound terrible, but the reality is that this was meant to be kind of a pep talk, and I failed, so I'm sorry. But that's kind of my take on it, that it's really mostly an emotional response. And there's also this secondary view that will play a lot into the whole Nicaragua thing, is that if you are steeped in, grow up in, and only used to Western civilization, that's most of Europe, North America, a few other places, then the loss of that, the lack of that, the failure of that, if that's really going to happen, right? We're not saying it is, we're just saying that the fear of that happening is bad. But to many of us, in most of the world, right, Western civilization does not represent, first of all, a nostalgic feeling, or very much of one, right? It's not the one you grew up in or whatever. So if you're from Asia, for example, generally you look at Western civilization and go, so that's different. And if it collapses, oh, that's too bad for them. But it's not your world collapsing, it's somewhere else. To those of us who grew up in the West, it's the whole world. The world is ending. But to Asia or Africa or Eastern Europe or Latin America, it's, oh, well, that's an experiment that doesn't seem to be going well. It's a very different thing. If Western civilization was to vanish tomorrow, well, we would notice, right? The world would wobble a little bit differently, but it wouldn't be the end of where we are because we're not in that civilization anymore. So once you leave Western civilization and start thinking in a different mindset, right? You join the third world, you join the unaligned world, you join the Latin American world, the African world, the Asian world, Eastern European world, and so forth. You have an opportunity to kind of step back and go, oh, wait, that's not a foregone conclusion as to how things work. And that failing isn't necessarily this tragic event. If you were to go back even in European history and say, well, the collapse of the Assyrian Empire was obviously the end of the world. How could anything go on without Assyria? Today, people are like, I don't really know Assyria. I heard that once in school. Was that important? But at the time, it was much more of the world than the Western world is now. So to much of the world, the decline and fall of the West just kind of adds up to being like the Assyrian Empire. Yeah, it was a huge deal at the time, but in retrospect, it was a little bit on the verge of irrelevant. It wasn't really irrelevant, but it was kind of a flash in the pan. To the Assyrians, it was absolutely everything. But to the Persians, it was a footnote. And the Persians, to the Greeks, were a footnote. And the Greeks, to the Romans, were kind of an inspiration for some literature and architecture, and mostly a footnote. The Romans managed to have a much larger impact, and we would notice that a lot more throughout history, but mostly by lingering on for a really long time. The point being, one, is that Western civilization is not going to just vanish. That's not true. It may lose prominence. That's within the realm of possibility. But that having it lose prominence or even go away is a terrible thing is only a terrible thing if you're in Western civilization and don't know how to adapt to everybody else. But to most of the world, this is not actually a bad thing. To most of the world, it's actually a good thing. You have to remember that to almost everyone, Western civilization represents nearly all wars and nearly all colonization and the majority of slavery and other things. So that doesn't mean other places are perfect or even great, but too much of the world, Western world, represents their biggest fears. Not that it's going to go away, that it isn't. So that gives you kind of a foundation. And I know to many people in the West, you're like, no, one, you're down on the West. Why are you down on the West? That's not the point, right? And two, oh, you think the West is going to disappear? No, I don't think it is. But also not the point. The point is the level of despair that people in the Western hemisphere, that people in the Western culture tend to feel is based around two things: what I believe is a false sense of collapse, and that collapse is bad. I don't think either of those things is a given end point, right? I don't think it's going to collapse, and even if it did, that might be a good thing. That's the starting point. Now, that takes us to our question: is Nicaragua a great place to witness this from a kind of a safe position? Yeah, I think it is. Living here already, we have had, for my family, we've had years now of being isolated from these problems, and returning to the U.S. or looking at U.S. media reminds us that much of the rest of the world is in this panic and going through this despair, and not having kids anymore, many fewer kids. And here, people are having kids because the future is bright. We don't have this looming dread over the horizon, right? We don't have this terrible future where we're running out of water or can't produce food. We have no projected future where those are problems. We have enough fresh water for forever. We have food sovereignty. We just have to stop feeding everyone else. And the things that we get from outside, we can live without. Sure, we'd like to keep getting iPhones, obviously, but if we didn't, we still have nice rocking chairs to watch a beautiful sunset while we sip our pina coladas and drink our toñas and watch everyone else collapse. Things are actually looking really good here. We don't have these fears in general. When I talk to young Nicaraguans, none of them have this sense of dread about the future, right? Maybe that's because they're isolated, but they're not really. We know what's going on everywhere else, and it doesn't really affect us. Or if it does, it tends to affect us in a positive way, right? The fall of the Western Hemisphere, said it again, the fall of Western civilization, if that affects us, is either neutral or positive. It's not a negative. We are in a position where we're mostly isolated from the problems of much of the world, but we do benefit from some things. Everything's kind of looking our way. So we're in a position where, yes, over the last several years, things have been doing really well here. So we're isolated in that way, that where other people are going through big recessions and collapses and markets going down, we had a lot of that a long time ago, and to some degree we have not rebounded, but in other ways we have. So we have some things that have just kind of stayed low and other things that are rebounding. And over a long period of time, it feels like good, solid growth over a long time. And that's what we're witnessing here. Lots of long-term, good, solid growth that is happening. That feels pretty good. That gives you a feeling for the future is going to be better than today. And that alone isn't enough. In order for that to be enough, you need today to also be good. That's where Nicaragua is really kicking butt. Right now, life in Nicaragua for most people has been pretty decent, right? People are generally happy. I understand we have a poverty problem, we have a employment problem, things are not perfect, but those people who are dealing with poverty are often not super depressed about it, right? They still have food on the table, they still have shelter, they still have health care, they still have a positive outlook on the future for the most part, right? In the same position in the United States, in Canada, in most of the Western world, people who are way beyond that financial position, people who have really excellent professional jobs, people who are working hard, people who have 2 cars in the garage, people who have bought a big house, are terrified for the future. Will their retirement carry them through, or will they starve to death? Will they be able to keep enough heating oil to stay from freezing to death in England? Will they be able to do the things that they do now in the future? Will life continue to get better or hold steady? No, they're afraid it's going to erode. They don't know if they can stop working in the future. Retirement may be off the table. Do they want to have kids? Are they worried about putting kids into this world? They are, right? So even people who are in what feel like much stronger financial positions, they live in terror. What if they get sick and can't afford the health care? What if the insurance doesn't pay for it? Terrible things could happen. They live in real fear. And that's not something we see mirrored here. So I think absolutely. I think that life in Nicaragua is going to continue regardless, right? I think that it's going to keep having this upward movement. I think things are going to keep being good. Everything we see here has indications of long-term positive growth. The kinds of investment we see culturally, financially, economically in the country are things that take a long time to pay off and are already starting to pay off. So they have a lot of fruition yet to get through. So that has momentum. right? It has investment. It has reason to think it's going to keep working. Now, will it? Things go wrong, of course, but we have a very good reason, and there's a reason why people feel good about the future of the country, right? Because they feel this, they see this. Everyday life in Nicaragua has a positive outcome, right? Every time we take a drive somewhere, it's new development in good, positive ways, right? We're seeing not just more houses that someone doesn't need, but actual converting of poverty-stricken areas into middle-income areas, right? We're constantly seeing more jobs exist. We're still very short on jobs, but not as short as we were before. The average income is still very low, but not as low as it was before. People see next year as likely going to be better than this year. That's not something that much of the world can say right now. And so that we've been saying that for years, that we're going to be able to keep saying that. And if you go back and watch my show, I think this is a good indicator, right? My attitude about the country, my viewpoint on the country has not changed in a meaningful way since we returned in 2019 after having been away a little while. When we were here in 2015, we were kind of getting our roots, understanding what things were like, and over time started to have a better picture of the country. By 2021, when my videos were really starting to come out regularly, I think that the impression of things has changed some, but relatively little. It has been, we're in a good place. Things are going well. Investment goes in this way. We're moving in this trajectory, and so forth. Those things have not changed. If anything, they've improved, but maintaining the same essential structure, the same essential direction. So having been here already for more than half a decade of doing the show all the time, and you can see my opinion and projections of it and how it goes, and I stand by my early projections that if only we had trains, we would take off in a completely new velocity than we have today. Well, yes, I remain faithful to my train dream, but the overall movement of the country has remained in that positive way. And our isolation from the problems of the world, right? We have, when we first moved back, when we made this big decision, it was before the world really had this feeling of all these things falling apart, of so many bad things happening, right? So we didn't have that perspective when we started, and watching the world kind of go into this deep despair. I'm not saying that none of it was there before, but this really big movement that we're seeing now. We watch that from here. And so you can see that I'm not just looking at Nicaragua as it feels positive in relation to other places that are doing badly, but it's doing well in an absolute sense, which of course means it also looks good relative to places that are doing badly, but it also looks good in relative to places that are doing pretty well, because it's doing very well. And so, of course, I could be wrong, but my feeling is, and this is why I want to be here and why I want my kids to have a future here, is that this represents an ongoing positive movement towards a better future, right? Whether that's a social one or a financial one, an economic one, a societal one, whatever. I feel that the general movement that I see of people's opinion on the ground, the attitude, the way that they treat each other, the way that they view life from here is one that makes me happy, and I feel is going to maintain, while other places, and Nicaragua has a tendency towards ignoring the outside world to rather a strong degree, right? There isn't this obsession with, oh no, things in the United States aren't going well. How is that going to affect us? You don't hear that. Right? You hear, oh, I met an American. I want to ask them because I heard things are going, this way or that way there. I want their opinion on it. Oh, they're interested. But they're not interested like, oh, no, how's it going to impact us? They're interested like, oh, that's different than what we experience. Is that real? What's your take on that? What's your perspective on that? And so I think to Geospatial's question, yes. I struggle to think of places that are likely so isolated from the problems and not following that trajectory on their own. And of course, you can think of wonderful places all over the world that you may think, oh, well, that could be pretty isolated, right? We'll throw, a lot of Southeast Asia out there. But a lot of Southeast Asia has a very strong dependency on tourism, for example. Well, that's an industry that may be impacted outside of world regions or whatever. That's a very scary thing. Nicaragua has extremely little dependency on tourism, especially now, and that's something that makes us feel better. We don't see this sudden change in tourism behavior impacting us. But if you live in Costa Rica, for example, that's something you live in fear of. That may not happen, but you're worried because you have a dependency on it. Things like that can be really influential. So if you're looking for a place that gives you an opportunity to rethink your viewpoint, where you're willing to step outside of not just and this is a big thing, right? When we say, well, you're from the United States, you're from Canada, you're looking to move to Latin America, you're going to step into this whole Latino culture thing. It's like, oh, you're going to have to learn Spanish. You're going to have to learn to eat asada. You're going to have to maybe learn to dance, right? And that's like, haha, learning a new culture. But the reality is that to a very strong degree, we're talking about shifting from Western civilization to a different civilization category, right? We're not Eastern civilization. We're a non-West or East civilization zone. But you're talking about giving up a very core tenet of society as you know it. And so in like Mexico, it's much more mild because they're so influenced by North America. But by the time you get down here in much of South America, you're talking about cultures that are potentially very drastically different than what you're used to. And that is part of the adventure, for sure. It's not just learning a new language, it's learning a new everything. And if you're willing to do that, if you're excited by that, if you're going to challenge yourself to do that, then I think you have this really big opportunity to kind of step outside the bubble. And every culture has this bubble, right? I'm not saying it's the bubble, outside of the bubble that you were in, and look back on it and be like, oh, that bubble isn't the whole world. That bubble isn't something that I have to worry about. I now live outside that bubble. That's okay. Oh, and if that bubble goes away, that's fine, because the people in that bubble, it's not like they're going to die. It's not like they're going to cease to exist. They just have to figure out a different bubble to be in or redefine their bubble. Maybe that's a good thing. So, I feel very good about the future here in Nicaragua. I feel really good about the people who are willing to take that leap. If you're coming here trying to replicate things from somewhere else, as we always say, it's not wrong necessarily, but you're not going to be getting those benefits. If you're still tying yourself to Western civilization, you're going to be worried about the future of Western civilization. But if you're willing to adapt, you're willing to, test the waters and really jump in to something different, I think you have a huge opportunity for looking back and saying, oh, I have flexibility. I don't have to worry about these kind of artificial constructs that we have of life not maintaining in the way that I thought they would. They're not that important. What's important is family, friends, sunsets on the beach, music, people, animals, my pets, right? A good night's sleep, Scott's show. There's all these actually important things. And we can get away from those that just don't matter, that we feel like matter because society makes us feel that way. But often they don't. There's a good opportunity there. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for the question. Like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me some coffees at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Al Miller. And as always, I will see all of you tomorrow.